Fighter jets scrambled in Europe and North America, the threat of Russia and its military encroaching on Allied territory. The head of NATO, Secretary General Mark Rutte, joins me in just a moment. Meanwhile, are you good at math? We've been crunching the numbers. 205. 205 is the number of executive orders President Trump has signed so far in his second term. Today, Trump's newest order is number 206. We're going to let you know what the president is ordering when we find out. Our math continues. We have another number for you. It's 21. President Trump has now hosted his 21st world leader of his second term. Today, it was Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Why should you care about Turkey? Number one, Turkey's a member of NATO. But besides NATO, Turkey has ties with China, Iran, and Russia. Here's what President Trump thinks about Turkey's president, President Erdogan.
So this is a tough man. This is a guy who's highly opinionated. Usually I don't like opinionated people, but I always like this one. But he's a tough one. And he does an amazing job in his country. And we've had tremendous relationships, both having to do with war and having to do with trade. And I guess today we're talking about both. I'd like to have him stop buying any oil from Russia while Russia continues this rampage against Ukraine. And they've been fighting. They've lost millions of lives already. And for what? You know?
Russia is broadening its threat beyond Ukraine. Just today, 4 Russian planes, including 2 bombers and 2 fighter jets, were spotted off Alaska. They were tracked in the Alaska Air Defense Identification Zone. It's a zone that is technically international airspace, but it requires foreign aircraft to identify themselves. The United States and Canada scrambled jets to intercept Russia, but thankfully, Russia stayed in that international zone and did not fly into American or Canadian airspace. Russia's really been pushing it this month. Turning to Europe now and our NATO partners, in recent weeks, Russia has carried out several airspace violations. Those airspace violations include Lithuania, Estonia, Romania, and Poland. All these nations reported either drones or jets over their skies. NATO even had to scramble its jets to intercept some of the Russian jets. In the past, President Trump has been critical of NATO. It has mostly been over who was footing the bill. Here's what the president said today.
We're in NATO, and you know, they're paying now 5% of GDP. Nobody thought that was possible, and they agreed to that 6 months ago when I was there. And the relationship is very good. The NATO countries, with us, is the strongest it's ever been. Now, we're talking about trillions of dollars, and they're spending that, giving that money to us, and we are giving them great defensive, you know, the Patriots and all of the different javelins, all the different missile systems and everything else that they want. But it's, you know, it's trillions of dollars. So we appreciate that they did that.
NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte joins me. Good evening, sir.
Greta, good to be on the show. Good to have me.
Thank you, sir. Is Putin playing with fire, sir, with sending all these sort of provocative planes and drones over NATO airspace?
Well, we are still assessing whether it is intentional, but even if it is not intentional, then it is blatantly incompetent. And it is reckless, it is unacceptable what he did with these drones in Poland, what happened in Estonia with 3 MiG fighter jets flying for more than 10 minutes in Estonian airspace and then being escorted out by our fantastic military who followed all the procedures and did exactly what they were trained for. But it is unacceptable and it is reckless and it has got to stop.
I don't want to be an alarmist, but in terms of Article 5, what constitutes an attack on a NATO nation? I take it flying over airspace, which is obnoxious, but no one dies, wouldn't be an attack. Dropping a bomb where even one person would be killed would be an attack. I mean, how do you define attack to invoke Article 5?
Well, to make Putin not too wise, we will always be a little bit ambiguous about that, because we don't want him to know too much. But I can assure you that we will know when Article 5 is being breached. And he will also know, I can assure you. But what happened here is that they entered airspace. The safest way was to escort them out of the airspace. But if these planes would pose a threat to our infrastructure and of course to our people living, for example, in Estonia, in the case of what happened last Friday, then I can assure you that our military have all the mandates and all the authorities to do what is necessary, including really getting very tough and taking on that airplane if necessary.
In studying history, Britain and the UK get a lot of criticism for appeasement, for basically trying to keep Hitler happy, thinking that he wouldn't do anything. And of course, on September 1st, 1939, he invaded Poland. At what point are we appeasing Putin? Because he's already in 2014 invaded Crimea. February 2022, he's into eastern Ukraine, and he keeps moving farther west. Now he's sending planes into space or drones into areas over some NATO countries. At what point are we appeasing him?
We are not appeasing him. I can absolutely assure you that. And also thanks to President Trump's leadership, he started to break the deadlock in February. He started the dialogue with Putin to end the terrible war in Ukraine. I fully support the president's efforts. But we are absolutely clear with Putin that we know, as the president said earlier this week in his Truth Social post, that we are sometimes dealing here with a paper tiger. He has so far not been able to get more than a couple of square kilometers per month of Ukraine. He has lost now 1 million people dead or seriously wounded since the start of the war. And per month he is now losing more Russian soldiers than they lost in 10 years in Afghanistan during the Soviet era. So clearly he is not successful, and the president noted that, and I was totally in agreement with him in his post on Tuesday. But we have to bring him to the negotiating table, to sit down with Zelensky, to end this terrible war, and all the efforts the president is putting in, I completely support.
Well, what will it take to get him to the table to talk? Because the nation thought, and I think probably the world, is that when he went to Alaska last month to meet with the president, that was certainly a good gesture by the United States, a good faith gesture to get him together with Mr. Zelensky. But he's just ignored us. And in fact, not only has he just ignored us, he's sort of taunting us by sending drones and planes over territory.
Yes, but at the same time, what he sees is that NATO is united, that his drones are being taken down in Poland, that his airplanes are escorted out of Estonian airspace. He knows that if these planes are really posing a threat, that then we will do more, much more than just escorting them out of the airspace. Our military have all the authorities and can do what they need to do to keep us safe, including our highest generals. So our military have trained and prepared for this over the years. He knows that, and what we now need to do is to get him to the negotiating table. The fact that the president had probably his biggest foreign policy success at the NATO summit in The Hague, where all the allies committed to this 5%, and therefore Europe finally equalizing its spending with the US, not happened since Eisenhower, an irritant for all those decennia. President Trump was able to solve this. That then President Trump decided to send lethal, non-lethal weapons to Ukraine, paid for by European allies. And I think that was a great step he took in July, and that is now happening. And Ukraine needs those weapons supplied by the US, paid for by allies. And of course, we have the sanctions. And I know that the president also today discussed with Erdogan the oil, that Erdogan is still buying oil from Russia. Hungary is still buying oil from Russia. And we are working on that. And the president of the European Commission is working with the White House and Secretary Bessent to look what we can do with China and put more pressure on the Chinese, collectively, Europe and the United States together.
Prior to being the Secretary General of NATO, you were the Prime Minister of the Netherlands for quite a number of years. And as doing a little research, I found that you have been in the same room with Putin. He's quite a mystery to me. I've never interviewed him or met him. Can you give me an idea? I mean, can you tell me when you first met him, about when, and what your impression was, and how it's changed over the years, if it has? Yeah,
my first meeting was in October 2011. We met many times. He visited me in the Netherlands. I visited him a couple of times in Russia. We met also at these international gatherings. In July 2014, the Russians shoot down MH17, the flight from Malaysian Airlines, flying from Amsterdam with 196 Dutch people on board, in total 298 people. The Russians never took responsibility for this. So since that moment, I have had many conversations with him to make sure that he would take responsibility. The problem with Putin is that you really have to corner him. He has to feel that there is no other way than to make a deal. And I think what the president is doing now is exactly the right course. Step by step, upping the pressure on Putin through the sanctions, through the weapons deliveries, through the unity in NATO the president achieved at the NATO summit in The Hague on the spending. And this ultimately will deliver Putin. Don't forget that as we speak, there are lines of cars waiting at the gasoline stations in Russia to fill up their cars because there are many problems now with oil supply, because the Ukrainians have hit refineries inside Russia. Don't forget that the Russian economy is in a very difficult state at the moment. As a student of history, which Putin is, and he loves his country and his history, he cannot be proud of what he is achieving today. So this paper tiger, well, basically, the president calling him a paper tiger, Russia calling him paper tiger, was exactly the right phrase. Then he said, no, I'm a bear. I'm not a paper tiger. Well, a bear never calls himself a bear because we all know he is, so that was a weak moment. And I think this is exactly the type of pressure we need.
What does he want?
Well, of course, it's difficult to say, but I think the president is right in assessing that he wants the whole of Ukraine, and he hates the fact that NATO is so strong, so he wants to test NATO. And that's why we cannot let him do that. That's why NATO has to ramp up its own defenses. That's what we are doing. The Germans will by 2029 spend more than double what they spent in 2021, the second biggest ally in NATO, and all the other European allies are following, and Canada, following the US's lead on this. But also we have to prevent him from being successful in Ukraine, and he is not. I mean, he is against incredible costs, having lost, as I said, 1 million people already. He is now gaining a couple of square miles a month, a week, a month, very incremental progress, not being successful. But hey, he is willing to do that. He is willing to sacrifice 1 million people, dead or seriously wounded.
What?
So this is your evidence that we have to deal with him.
Well, you know, that's sort of the, he's willing to sacrifice 1 million people. I remember George W. Bush, when we went into Iraq, and he looked at pictures of dead soldiers. And before that, Bush 41 mourned during, whenever anyone died, and he had to write a letter to the family of the dead soldier. President Trump can't stand to look at the pictures of Ukrainians and Russians who are dead. Well, Putin doesn't seem to care. No,
he doesn't seem to care. And I think in Russia, many people feel a sort of pride of participating in a war like this. But on the other hand, we also know that this war is increasingly unpopular in Russia, that people, basically what the president said this week, this paper tiger thing. Of course, also people in Russia are starting to realize that he is not achieving his goals, and therefore that he needs to sit down with Zelensky and come to an end of this terrible war. This is the only way out.
Well, it's being financed in part by people buying his oil and his gas. Turkey and NATO member is one of its biggest buyers. Of course, President Erdogan, as I noticed, was at the White House today. If Turkey doesn't buy its oil and gas from Russia, where does it get its oil and gas? Because they're financing it, but they're also good friends. They're also part of NATO.
They are, and Turkey, but also Hungary and Slovakia, they can also find, of course, this in other parts of the world, oil and gas markets. Probably it will be at a premium because this stuff coming out of Russia is not that expensive. But hey, guess what? Because the Ukrainians have hit the oil infrastructure oil refinery infrastructure inside Russia, Russia had to bring down the exports of its oil and gas into Turkey, into other countries. So they already have to look at the world market for other suppliers. So this is already happening, and I completely concur with the president. We really have to up the pressure on the countries still buying the oil. And I'm extremely happy that the president and Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission president, have a very strong relationship and are working together on also putting more pressure on China.
NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, thank you very much. You have a really important job, so I really appreciate coming and talking to me.
Thank you for having me on the show. It's really a great honor.
Thank you, sir. And coming up, the countdown is on. Will the Department of Justice indict former FBI Director James Comey? There's a time limitation. That when the record continues. The Department of Justice is considering asking a grand jury to indict former FBI Director James Comey for perjury by Tuesday. Why now and why by Tuesday? Well, the statute of limitations for perjury is 5 years. Once Wednesday rolls around, there's no way Comey can be indicted for perjury. The perjury, if it did occur, and if he's indicted, relates to Comey's testimony before Congress 5 years ago, back on September 30th, 2020. Comey's testimony back 5 years ago was about his handling of the investigation into alleged Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election. The current case about Comey is being handled by the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of Virginia. You may remember in 2017, President Trump fired Comey, and for years he has criticized Comey over his handling of the investigation. Well, today, President Trump was asked about Comey potentially getting indicted. Here's what the president said.
Well, I can't tell you what's going to happen because I don't know. You have very professional people headed up by the Attorney General, and Todd Blanche, and Lindsay Halligan, who's a very smart, good lawyer, very good lawyer. They're going to make a determination. I'm not making that determination. I think I'd be allowed to get involved if I want, but I don't really choose to do so. I can only say that Comey's a bad person. He's a sick person. I think he's a sick guy, actually. He did terrible things at the FBI. And but I don't know. I have no idea what's going to happen.
Former federal prosecutor Jim Trusty joins me. Nice to see you, Jim.
Hey, you too.
As a practical matter, we keep saying the U.S. Attorney's Office is going to indict someone. It's the grand jury that indicts, but can the U.S. Attorney's Office navigate it such that you can indict a ham sandwich?
You don't even need the bread. Yeah, you can just do the ham or the bread. Look, it's not a heavy lift to get an indictment generally, but when it becomes politically charged, and if the grand jurors presumably are watching the news and seeing some of the machinations, they could have some resistance. So you can't totally take it for granted. I've seen cases that got no billed, meaning they couldn't amass enough votes to be an indictment. But it's going to be interesting, and we'll know either today or by early next week.
Well, you're a former federal prosecutor. I'm a former defense attorney. And I'll tell you what's caught my attention. The fact that if he's indicted, it'll be the Eastern District of Virginia and not inside the district. And the capital is inside the district. And so you would think it would be here. But as a criminal defense attorney, we always feared our clients getting indicted across the river in Virginia more than we did here in the District of Columbia. Now, that's 30, 40 years old information or folklore, but why is this in the Eastern District of Virginia and not here in the District of Columbia?
Yeah, good question. And two things. One is that I think Comey had a history as an AUSA in Alexandria or Richmond, but in the Eastern District of Virginia. So it's not necessarily a bad place for him to land. But I think it goes back to the fact that when he testified to Congress, it was during COVID, and he was sitting at his home on Zoom. So technically your venue was for the false statement.
Does he live in Virginia?
I think so. So I think that's my best guess. I don't know 100%, but I think that's what's going on, is that he actually committed the false statement offense from Virginia to D.C., which means you could indict at either place.
All right, I'll tell you, perjury is a hard case to win for a prosecutor generally, I think, unless it's a slam dunk. I'll tell you what bothers me about Comey, something that sticks in my head, and this was after he got fired by President Trump. And what he did was on May 9th, after he got fired on May 9th, is he had a memo from some notes from back in February that he leaked to his buddy in New York at Columbia University to leak to the New York Times. And, and that was completely dirty. If, either it shouldn't have been leaked at all, or at least he should have had the courage to put his own name on it. But when he's sneaking around, that sticks with me, and I think that he's a sneaky guy.
Yeah, it should. I mean, I think he confuses height with stature. He did a lot to bring down the FBI during his tenure, and the biggest thing you just touched on is he had a special employee. He designated his college friend, his university professor friend, as a special employee, which gives him access to law enforcement sensitive information, not necessarily classified, but important stuff. And then he turns him loose to leak to the New York Times all the time. So that's really the crux of this false statement. Did he authorize self-serving leaks because he was about to get fired or had been fired, or did he not? And I think that there's probably a credible case that this guy was leaking stuff to try to save his own skin.
But he did some weird things, too, because right before the 2016 election, the Clinton campaign, Hillary Clinton campaign, thinks that he sabotaged them. Because sometime before, he said that they found lots of classified documents on Huma Abedin's then ex-husband or about to be ex-husband's laptop or something. And the Clinton campaign thought that he was dirty towards them. That why did he say that? Because in July, he had cleared her.
Yeah, I mean, look, here's the dirty little secret in that whole story. He had no business being out there announcing anything.
That's right. That's right.
And of all people to know, a former deputy attorney general should know I'm not the one to go out there and pronounce whether we have a hot investigation or a cold investigation. So the common denominator for all his behavior, whether you look at it as hurting a Democrat or hurting a Republican, is hubris, is arrogance, that the guy takes it upon himself to be the voice of all law enforcement. And that's what gets you in trouble. And so, it's hard to shed a tear for this guy when he's had a history, including 2 OIG investigations that found he violated DOJ policy. It's kind of hard to care for him at this point when that's what got him in trouble.
And forcing the whole Russian thing, it did turn out to be nothing.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it was a funded hoax that came from the HRC camp.
Anyway, Jim Trusty, thank you, sir.
Yeah, good to see you.
And we want to take you now to the White House, where President Trump is about to sign some executive orders.
We'll start off with one that's a proclamation, and
Yes, sir.
Want to do that, Will?
Yes, sir. So today is Gold Star Mothers and Families Day. This is an annual proclamation. This is to commemorate the fallen, those who have died for all of our freedoms and for our country, and for their families who have suffered such grievous losses. But this is a proclamation commemorating Gold Star Mothers and Gold Star families.
Yeah, and they're great people. Incredible people, what they've had to go through. Very few people could have gone through this kind of thing. Gold Star. Okay, thank you very much. He'll put it over here, Steve.
Next, sir, we have an executive order on TikTok. From the first days of your administration, you've charged a team from your administration, led by Vice President Vance, with ensuring that we can preserve TikTok as a platform for the 170 million Americans who use it, while ensuring that their data is properly protected as required by law. With this executive order, you will be effectively bringing into effect the agreement that will save TikTok and ensure that it can operate safely and securely.
So this is interesting because I had a very good talk with President Xi, a lot of respect for him. Hopefully he has a lot of respect for me too. And we talked about TikTok and other things, but we talked about TikTok, and he gave us the go-ahead. It's run by American investors and American companies, great ones, great investors, the biggest. You don't get bigger, I don't imagine. And maybe I'll have JD. JD was very much involved and in charge of it. And maybe I'll have you say a few words about the deal. He would report back, and the points of the deal, I think, are great for our country. So, JD, do you want to give it a little talk, please?
Yes, sir. Yeah. So thank you, sir, for your leadership and for your help. We really couldn't have done this without the president actually ushering this deal over the finish line. There was some resistance on the Chinese side, but the fundamental thing that we wanted to accomplish is that we wanted to keep TikTok operating, but we also wanted to make sure that we protected Americans' data privacy as required by law, both because it's the right thing to do, but also because it's a legal requirement of the law that was passed last year by Congress. So we think that we were able to do that. Of course, we're going to keep on working at it, but this deal really does mean that Americans can use TikTok, but actually use it with more confidence than they had in the past, because their data is going to be secure and it's not going to be used as a propaganda weapon against our fellow citizens. We're very excited about it. We appreciate the cooperation of everybody involved, and it's a big day.
And I think I can say that especially the young people, they really wanted this to happen. They did not want to have TikTok close. And I got, a little used to TikTok. I used it myself during the campaign, and it was very successful because you know how I did with the young voter. And Charlie helped me a lot too. And he said to me, you should go on TikTok. And it actually had, because we got record votes with the young voter, as you know, for the election. So I was a little bit prejudiced in that way toward TikTok. It was very good and very meaningful, but we have American investors taking it over, running it, highly sophisticated, including Larry Ellison. And Oracle, I guess, is going to play a very big role in terms of security, safety, and everything else. So we have very good controls. And literally, I would get a call from friends of mine who were fathers of young people saying, could you do me a favor? Could you get it approved, please? My son is driving me crazy. So we're getting it done, and they have a big audience, and we have great American investors. And here's your final copy. TikTok. Maybe if you want, we could take a couple of questions on TikTok, and then we're going to get onto something completely different, okay? Yeah.
Mr. President,
Jeff?
Mr. Vice President, you mentioned that China was resistant. Can you describe where China is now? Are they fully on board with this?
They're
Or
on
is
board,
there anything more?
yeah. I spoke with President Xi. We had a good talk. I told him what we were doing, and he said, go ahead with it.
On the algorithm, it's still being leased coming from China. Are you satisfied that there's no security concerns for
Yeah,
that?
I am. I really am.
It would push disruptive
The
content?
biggest reason is that it's owned by Americans. It's, and very sophisticated Americans and people that love the country and very smart Americans too. So they don't want anything like that to happen. Yes, please.
Thank you. Is there any operational relationship with Chinese entities or staff to execute the deal
With who?
with the Chinese?
I don't think so. Not that I know. No, we're going to be. This is going to be American operated all the way, and great respect for President Xi, and I very much appreciate that he approved the deal because to get it done properly, we really needed the support of China and the approval of China. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. President, now that Americans will have operational control, do you want to see the algorithm suggest more MAGA-related content prioritized?
I always like MAGA related. If I could, I'd make it 100% MAGA related. It's actually a good question, but I would, yeah, if I could make it 100% MAGA, I would, but it's not going to work out that way, unfortunately. No, everyone's going to be treated fairly. Every group, every philosophy, every policy will be treated very fairly. Thank you.
Mr. President, do you know the valuation? You know the American company is going to be valued in the billions?
Well, they valued it very highly. They're paying a big number. Do you want to talk, Scott? Do you want to say something about value?
Well, I'll let the Vice
Okay,
President,
good.
and then
JD?
I can follow
And
up.
you'll say something.
Sure. Well, first of all, I would say all credit goes to the Secretary of the Treasury. Couldn't have got it done without Scott. Also couldn't have got it done without Sean Cooksey on my team, so thanks to them. The company will be valued around $14 billion. We actually think this is a good deal for investors, but ultimately the investors are going to make the determination about what they want to invest in and what they think is a proper value. The most important thing is that it does protect Americans' data security.
You've been watching President Trump in the Oval Office. He just signed a Tik Tok deal. The Chinese-owned app will now be majority owned by a group of American investors. As many as 170 million people use TikTok in the United States. Coming up, Syracuse college students charged with a campus hate crime. That when the record continues. Okay, where are their parents? I know where they will be. They're going to be in court. Two Syracuse University students face hate crime charges for unthinkable conduct. Authorities say the two students tossed a bag of pork into a Jewish fraternity house on Rosh Hashanah. It happened at the Zeta Beta Tau house as members there prepared to celebrate the Jewish New Year. University police say one of the men entered the home and tossed a clear plastic bag of pork against the wall. The contents splattered on the floor and the suspect fled, hopped into a car driven by the second man. Both 18-year-old suspects, legal adults, were caught and charged with burglary as a hate crime. Professor Emeritus at Harvard Law School and author of The Preventive State, Alan Dershowitz, joins me. Alan, your thoughts about this disgusting conduct?
Well, it is a crime. Obviously, if they had done it outside the fraternity, it would be different. It would be hate, but it would be expressive speech and probably protected by the Constitution. But once one of them went into the house and the other one stayed outside knowing that he was going to help the first one escape, they both did commit technically the crime of burglary. Burglary is entering on the premises of another with an intent to commit a crime. They will defend on the ground that it really is just a misdemeanor and not burglary. And the question really is, did they do it as a fraternity prank? Did they do it because they hate Jews? Obviously, if they had thrown a rope with a noose into a black fraternity or pork into a Muslim fraternity, everybody would be saying, oh my God, this is terrible. And, you know, you have to really ask the question, how serious is it? Is this something that warrants expulsion? Is it something that warrants suspension? It certainly warrants a response by both the university, particularly the university. It seems to me that this is much more an expellable offense by the university because it violates all the standards of decency than it is a serious crime. But it is a crime, and probably they'll get a suspended sentence or a few weeks in jail just to demonstrate that people take this kind of thing seriously.
Well, I guess because with the, I mean, I would think it more likely in the prank department if it weren't for the fact that we have now witnessed so many anti-Semitic activities on campus that I think people have a heightened sense of how, you know, of what it means to be anti-Semitic. And so I started this with saying, like, where are their parents? I mean, these are 18-year-olds going off to college. They've been in college for probably a month. And, you know, and what are they learning at home that such behavior is, you know, is okay?
Well, I'm not sure you can blame the home. I think when kids get to college, often they become really completely deranged. They just follow the crowd. And there's so much anti-Semitism on campus, and it's acceptable. It's under the guise of anti-Zionism. I'm sure these people will say the pork was a protest against Israel's policies in Gaza, not against Jews. But, you know, there's so much hate on campus. Faculty members encourage it. Administrators remain silent. That's why I'm glad that the University of Syracuse, the administration at least, seems to be doing something about this, because this is a symptom of something far deeper and much more serious. Remember, when you want to predict what a country will look like in 20 years, you look at its student body today, and it will give you a sense. That's what happened in Nazi Germany. Young students were the ones who were blocking Jewish students from coming in 1933 and 1934. And then by 1939, they were hands-on perpetrators of the Holocaust. So you have to worry about the slippery slope, and you have to worry about what this will lead to. Free speech isn't free, even if this were protected speech. For example, if the pork had been simply displayed outside the fraternity house, that would be protected speech under the Constitution, but it might warrant serious discipline by university administrators.
Well, it became a crime, certainly, when they went into the building, because then it became a burglary, even if they were let in. Professor Alan Dershowitz, thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.
Coming up in just under 90 minutes, unless the governor intervenes, an Alabama man will be executed. The victim's son is now having a change of heart. That when the record continues. Tonight, in less than 90 minutes at 6 p.m. Eastern, the state of Alabama will execute 50-year-old Jeffrey West, unless, of course, the governor steps in and stops it. In 1997, West was convicted of murder and sentenced to death for shooting Margaret Berry in the back of the head during a robbery. At West's sentencing, one of Berry's sons, William Berry, at the time 13 years old, spoke in favor of West getting executed. But now, more than 25 years later, William Berry has changed his mind. He says that he does not want his mother's killer put to death. According to the New York Times, Berry said over the years, the lessons of a hard life, the baggage of his own mistakes, and what he believed was a divine response to years of prayer has pushed him towards forgiveness. Berry believes West's execution would only bring more pain. Berry's written a letter to Alabama Governor Kay Ivey, went to a rally at the state capitol, spoke to a journalist about his change of heart, and even written letters to the man who killed his mother, Jeffrey West. Governor Ivey responded to Berry's letter, saying in part, quote, "This is to deter future murders, to prevent the murderer from ever killing again, and to express society's outrage at such a terrible crime. Carrying out executions is my solemn duty," end quote. As of right now, West's execution is still scheduled for 6 p.m. Eastern. Former United States Attorney for the Northern District of Alabama, Jay Town, joins me. Jay, why does it take 25 years or so, not just in your state, but basically around the country, for this sentence to be carried out?
Yeah, appeals, Greta, appeals. There's
25 years
so
worth?
many levels. Yeah, no, the state of Alabama, up until I think it was 2011, had what was called a habeas appeal, Rule 32 appeal, and what it allowed circuit judges to do is just sort of pigeonhole this particular case for decades. And there was really nothing that the state could do about it to move it along. Now they only have 10 years for any state appeals to be exhausted. And that runs coincidental with any federal appeals as well. So within 10 years now, if you commit a capital offense as of 2011 or 12, 10 years later, you will face your execution if your appeals are not successful. So, but this is, like you said,
I don't know if you've ever witnessed one, but I witnessed one a number of years ago in Virginia, and I must say, I just share this with the viewers, at how bizarre it was. This was an execution by lethal injection. And the guy was strapped to a gurney. There were witnesses from the media, witnesses from the family of the victim. The guy on the gurney had family there. There's a phone for someone to grab a phone call in case the governor called. But the oddest part about it, the most sort of surreal, was just before they put the needle in his arm to kill him, they rolled up his sleeve and they took an alcohol swab and swabbed his arm so he wouldn't get an infection. And then as soon as they did that, they stuck the needle in his arm and killed him. I mean, the whole thing is this is just the whole experience is, I mean, it's really nothing like it. You read about death penalty, execution, but when you really get down where the rubber hits the road, it is really, I don't know how to, how putting someone to death is tough.
It is, and I've prosecuted capital murderers, and I've sent 2 people to death row. It doesn't sound like a large number, perhaps. It's an incredibly large number. And what I can say is I'm really proud, though. And I get that, Margaret Parrish Barry's son doesn't want to necessarily see Jeffrey Todd West put to death. That's okay. It's a very human response, sort of the one you're having, Greta. But I'm proud of Steve Marshall, our Attorney General here in the state of Alabama. This is the 5th or 6th time that we've tried to put West to death. Lethal injection just wasn't working. We've had all these lawsuits about lethal injection, though nationwide, which is why we have moved to a new method for nitrogen gas here in the state. And that's the one that this Jeffrey Todd West chose.
Well, I don't have any sympathy for him, don't get me wrong, because this was a burglary in some sort, it looked like a convenience store, and as she went to get the money, he just sort of gratuitously shot her in the back of the head. I mean, I was like, this is, I mean, the crime was terribly cruel, and he's a horrible human being, and I'm not defending him.
Yeah, and of course not, and I wasn't suggesting you were, of course. What I will say is this is not an innocent man. This is a man who has confessed, even recently, that he thinks about it every day and wishes that he hadn't done it. This was over $250, and the fact that he didn't want to witness to the robbery of the convenience store, and that's what Margaret Parrish Barry's life was worth. And I think to Kay Ivey's response, our governor, it's every punishment deters crime to some degree, but there's also the idea that a jury and a judge and a system said that this should be the punishment. And while she has the power to do it, it should be exercised sort of sparingly to commute his death sentence.
Well, adding to it is that it's about an hour and 15 minutes away from his execution, and he is probably eating his last meal. They actually do have last meals. J-Town, thank you.
It's good to see you, Greta. Thanks.
Nice. Coming up, a lot of people could be out of a job here in Washington. That when the record continues. Okay, get ready. That's what President Trump's administration has instructed federal agencies. They need to prepare for massive layoffs if the government shuts down at the strike of midnight on Tuesday. Beginning Wednesday and October 1st, the government runs out of funding and shuts down unless something happens on Capitol Hill. President Trump is blaming the Democrats, saying Democrats want to open borders again. Political White House reporter Sophia Kai joins me. Nice to see you, Sophia. Let me first find out about this shutdown, the layoffs. What can you tell me? What's the plan?
So, Russ Votes OMB last night told...
He's the director.
Yes, he's the director of OMB. He told the agencies, the federal agencies, that you should start preparing RIF plans now, because if there is a shutdown, they're not just going to do furloughs. They're going to take this opportunity to lay off and fire federal employees who are working on programs that don't further Trump's agenda. So,
Which is profoundly different than the other government shutdowns we've had, because the government workers get furloughed, they don't get paid, but then when they come back to work, when we start up again, they get back pay, and they're back to their job. So this is a very different one.
And it's just a blip. I mean, he even is very cognizant that this is very different from 2018, 2019, when the government was shut down for a couple of weeks. He's saying that we're going to be doing firings. And, they're very clear that this will only happen if the government shuts down. So reading between the tea leaves, it's absolutely leverage to get Democrats to the negotiating table.
Well, are these people that the Trump administration wanted to fire otherwise under DOJ or something else? Or is this, why these people?
So, this is a very broad letter. It asks agencies to identify who they should fire. Now, remember, in January, February, and March, DOJ already did a round of this. as much as they can, and they really cut extremely close to the bone, to the point now that GSA is bringing back workers who work in the public building service back to GSA, and these were people who were let go. So, I'm not really sure how much more that they could fire. And again, the Trump administration has been very careful not yet to say who they'll fire and where and how many, because that's getting into the details.
Is that threat getting a leverage on Capitol Hill with the Democrats? The Democrats saying, based on that report, what the OMB said, we better figure out a solution?
I think Democrats are calling his bluff. Some of them have straight up said, I spoke to Shalonda Young, the former OMB director under former President Biden, and she said, this is a threat. This is intimidation. This is using federal workers as an excuse. I think the thinking is that, well, if the Trump administration wants to go ahead and fire all of these workers, well, it's not going to be very good for them, and it's especially not going to be very good for them going into the midterms.
Sophia Kai, and the magic date is Tuesday, the 30th at midnight. We'll find out what happens, whether we have a government or not that's running. Thank you, Sophia. And coming up, some squatters have taken over an official building. That video when the record continues. Earlier this week, President Trump called Russia a paper tiger. Then yesterday, the Kremlin said it was a bear. Maybe Russia is a bear because it has a full island of them. New video shows a group of polar bears who took over one Russian island. The island is right across from northern Alaska on the Bering Sea. The island once housed a village of people and a Soviet weather center. Researchers lived and worked there until 1992 when they closed up shop and left. Since then, these squatters have moved in. The photographer who took this video says there are 20 polar bears living in the old weather center and even more on the rest of the island. The Chris Salcedo show is up next. Have a good evening.